Rappin with ReefBum is sponsored by Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine.
Hey, what's happening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rappin with ReefBum. I'm your host, Keith Berkelhamer. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming hobbyist, a very well-known hobbyist, Steve Weast. What's going on there, Steve, man? How you doing?
Great. Hi, Keith. Good talking to you again after our visit at Reefstock.
Yes. So Steve and I met for the first time at Reefstock in Colorado back in early March, and we had a really interesting, lengthy conversation. So I'm really psyched to have you on the show, man. So just for those that don't know Steve, his 1,000-gallon reef tank was one of the most iconic reef tanks of its time. Very inspirational tank. He took a break from keeping reef aquariums, but is now back with a stunning 400-gallon tank that's right behind him. And I was saying before we got on the live stream tonight, that is the best backdrop any guest has ever had on this show. So whatever you have done, Steve, to get that looking the way it has, you know, it's probably just the beauty of the tank itself, but you did a kick-ass job with the lighting. So we'll talk both about that old 1,000-gallon tank as well as the 400-gallon, his current reef tank. Check out his website. It's called OregonReef.com, and it chronicles his reef keeping journey. It's not a fancy website, right, Steve? But it's got a lot of information on it.
It's from 2004. Come on.
It looks it. It looks it, but it's the text, right? It's all about the text, and you've got some pictures of the old system on there. So it's go check it out, OregonReef.com. So before we start chatting with Steve, I want to thank the sponsors of the show, Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine. I really appreciate these companies supporting the live stream, and I also appreciate all the support from you folks out there tuning in. I see we have a whole bunch of people coming into the chat. Thanks for joining us. I see we've got ACI Aquaculture. What's happening there? Chris and Amanda Meckley, Doghouse Reefer, Trevor King. Yes, impressive reef for sure there, Steve. And Corey Page. So, yes, and as per usual, I encourage you folks to post your comments and questions in the chat. We'd love for this to be an interactive experience for those of you that are watching at home. Yes, thanks, Trevor. Smash that like button. That's very important, because the more people that smash that like button, the more people are going to find this live stream. Greg Carroll's in the house. What's happening there, man? Good to see you. Good to see you. All right, so Steve, yeah, we talked at length, met for the first time at Reef Stock, and I really did enjoy that conversation. You have a lot of original and unique ideas when it comes to keeping a reef tank. So I'm definitely excited to get into all that with you, and I'm excited to let the folks out there that haven't heard about your methods hear about them tonight. But first, Steve, just kind of give us a sense in terms of your reef keeping journey, how it all began and how you ended up where you're at today with a 400-gallon tank.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know quite how far we're going to go back, but
that's up to you, man.
I will say my interest in keeping saltwater aquariums, I can trace that back to basically August of 1973, when I was 10 years old and took a family vacation to Maui, stayed at the Sheraton and there at Kaanapali on Black Rock, spent the whole week snorkeling off Kaanapali Beach and just enthralled by everything there. So that kind of planted the bug, let the spark, so to speak. After that, it was probably 3 or 4 years later, I had my first tank. I never kept freshwater. So freshwater is completely alien to me.
You skipped that whole step.
Skipped the whole step, went right to my first tank was a 55-gallon, and that's back with crushed oyster shell and under gravel plates and lift tubes and that kind of stuff. And I had that for a number of years. And then that graduated in the early 80s to a 125. And that was kind of the training wheels, because now we're in the mini reef boom and wet dries and DLS spirals and spinning, wet bars and all that kind of stuff. Skimmers coming online. Mm-hmm. And I had that tank through the 80s when I was going to college. And when I graduated in college, I graduated college in 1989 with an aerospace engineering degree. Of course, that was the same year the Russians gave up and the Berlin Wall came down. No jobs in aerospace. So I got involved with construction, moved to Oregon in 1991, and I've been in construction, residential construction, mostly high-end, but some track, ever since. And after a big project, in fact, I was commuting down to Southern Cal, to subdivision down there that the Southern Cal people will know in Laguna Beach called Emerald Bay, is a big $4 million house that I tore to the ground and rebuilt. After that one, and a little bit of a windfall from that, I go, I'm going to put in a big aquarium. So when I got back from that, that's when started with the large aquarium. That would be basically 2000, 2001. So it all took off from there.
This is the 1,000-gallon tank you're talking about?
Actually, it started off as a 500.
Okay.
And that's the one that won a Tank of the Month on Reef Central. I think it was maybe March of 2002 type thing. Okay. And this is the start of the internet. I would have, I was still on dial-up and everything else back then. So, it was way different than it is now, although my skills haven't changed. So after I ran the 500 for a number of years and went, it would be better than 500. 850. So I took it down.
You went to 850.
Yeah. So that was the second tank. The big one was actually dimension-wise 850 gallons, but the sump was another 300 gallons.
Right.
So I took that tank down, expanded the tank stand and all for it, because it's really elevated the way my house is situated. And then so the 850 started, I want to say around 2004-ish type thing. And that ran a number of years. And then I decided, I did a lot of scuba diving up here in the Pacific Northwest. I want to do a cold water tank. So I added another cold water tank and took down the 850 at that time. We even considered that time moving. There were some life changes going on there as well. But I started the tank you see behind me here originally as a cold water tank because of all my scuba diving experience, because I could collect my own stock out of Puget Sound. So, and that ran for a number of years. There's a video on YouTube of that system and the critters involved with it, which is really kind of interesting because it's unique and different from what
Yeah.
we're used to doing here.
Yep.
And after that, again, took another break. Uncertainty again, especially with the economic downturn and how it affected my industry from 2008 on. So, and then I was just about ready to come back into the hobby, and then I had a personal kind of crisis. I actually fell from my roof, which resulted in the amputation of my right leg, which I think we talked about at Reef Stock. So that kind of delayed things, and I actually decided to come back into the hobby after looking at my empty tank for 7-8 years, sitting in the garage every day, collecting nothing but spiders. I'm going to go back to my roots and make a mixed reef tank. What the hell? Everything is here that I needed. All I have to do is add water, add a heater, and add lights, which was different from a cold water tank.
It's amazing that you held on to everything because, when I've taken a couple breaks myself from reef keeping, but, I didn't hold on to a lot of stuff. I didn't hold on to the tanks when I took those breaks, and some of the equipment I did. But it sounded like, man, you had everything kind of like on mothballs and ready to rock and roll, just because you
exactly.
You knew.
Exactly. Well, and there's not much of a market for larger stuff. It
Yeah.
takes a unique, unique buyer. So it's just like, I didn't need the money for it or anything else, and it's like I had a hard time selling. It was a hard time selling that. So it just sat there in the corner of the garage for a number of years, and it was easy to start back up because minimal investment, lights and a heater, started back up.
So I mentioned at the beginning your 1,000-gallon reef was iconic and all that stuff. That actually is an 850-gallon tank. Was that okay? With the sump, it's 1,000. So I just want to kind of show some shots of the of this 1,000-gallon system, and what we're looking at now, because you're not watching along on YouTube, is the actual acrylic aquarium itself, and it's looks like there's a guy on the forklift driver there that's ready to raise it up to the stand, which is right there in your garage.
He was actually my framer.
Oh, really?
My house framer. Free labor.
Beautiful.
You want your check? Free labor. Come over and do this.
Beautiful. So we're looking at this. This basically, it looks like a sump room in the garage with a couple of big doors, and the tank is on the top, and you've got it's all blacked out on the top there. So this is a very unique thing because you do live in northern Oregon, and the temperatures there. We were just talking about this before we got on the live stream. I guess you guys went through a big little heat wave for your part of the state there, up to 108 degrees. But typically it doesn't get that warm, right? You were saying you rarely get above 80 degrees.
Yeah, our typical summer highs would be averaging in the 80, but we can have short bouts in the 90s or even 100s. Last year, basically everybody thought the world was going to end because we actually one day got up to 116. It's just like, okay, this is not
Holy
Phoenix.
Crap, man, 116.
Yeah,
really?
That's our state record now. But prior to that, the state record was 107. So, and that went back to like the 40s.
Wow.
So, but it's rare and they're short-lived. Usually only a few days. So, but still, it's a problem. That's why most homes up here don't have air conditioning. I'd say about 30% of homes up here have air conditioning. So when something like this comes, people get pretty cranky.
That's gotta suck. If you get up to 108 degrees and you don't have any AC, I guess people are sleeping outdoors or something, figuring out a way to stay cold. So what kind of challenges were there or are there for keeping a sump and all the equipment in a garage?
Well, first off, this is an operational garage. Now, I do have the benefit. This is a little larger garage. The 3-car garage is about 1,200 square feet, and I have 16-foot ceiling. So it's a fairly large volume of air in here. And, of course, you have the temperature differences that you wouldn't have in an acclimated house. And it's an active garage, so I got cars going in and out. So I have to deal with fumes. I don't want my skimmers sucking in fumes. Now, in the Pacific Northwest here, we don't do basements. We're not cold enough for digging down. We're on crawl spaces. And generally, we'll have a couple, 3 feet of crawl space underneath our first floor. So I utilize that. My skimmer pulls from there. And that's basically sucking in ambient outside air through the foundation vents. So the other thing I do is in the garage, I have a large attic exhaust fan that I also run in the summer 24/7, but in the winter, so it doesn't freeze out too much, maybe 12 hours a day. And it'll turn over this entire air volume in about 20 minutes.
Wow.
And I have an intake filter on the other side over here from my crawl space, so it sucks air from there across the garage and out she goes. So it's fully ventilated with ambient air, keeps it a little about 20 degrees cooler in here than outside in summer, and probably about 15, 20 degrees warmer in here when we're really cold outside in the winter, because it's pulling that modified air from my crawl space, because the ground temperature is 55 degrees plus or minus. So as I even sit here, I can feel a breeze coming off here and going that way out towards the fan. So
that is key, to have good recirculating air wherever you're having a fish tank and your equipment with that fish tank.
Absolutely.
Because if you're in a room and it's all sealed up, I live in Vermont, and in the wintertime my windows are shut tight. So I had to add an air exchange unit to the basement where all my tanks are, my sumps and all that stuff. And so that runs all the time, basically starting in mid-October into like even the beginning of May, where I will have all the windows shut and be running that stuff. And that's great in terms of the pH for me, because that's before I started running that and after, I think I saw like a 0.2 pH point increase with that air exchange unit. So very, very important thing to do in terms of having that recirculating air, for sure. Let me go ahead, man.
I'm sure we'll talk about pH, but that is the first kind of domino to fall for helping with pH, is get ambient air here and sucking not CO2 laden air.
Yes.
So it's the first one. There are other things you can do, which I employ on here to get the pH that I strive for, but without that it wouldn't be possible. It's the first step.
Yeah, let's definitely dig into that a little bit in a bit. But I just want to kind of show off the old system, since it was such an incredible system. Here's the lighting. And so I'm counting metal halides. Let's see. You've got this big, looks like a wooden canopy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Am I counting that correctly? 12 metal halide?
All 400s. Yeah.
400 watt. What do you got? What bulbs were there?
There was as a mix, because it depends on where they were located over the tank. There was 10K Ushios, 14K Phoenixes, and 20K Radiums.
That must have been one hell of an electricity bill, huh?
Yeah, PG still sends me mail. We miss you.
and you must have had a kick-ass chiller thing going on there as well, I would imagine.
I had two horsepower chillers, and I would basically stagger them. 1 month one would run, 1 month the other one would run. And those chillers were outside the house completely. I had them built outside and plumbed in, so they can truly dump all the heat from it to the outside. So,
yeah, I did a shitty job in terms of engineering, putting my chiller into place, because I've got it in my sump room, and so the exhaust goes right into the sump room. It doesn't vent anywhere other than inside the room where I've got my 2 sumps plus 3 frag tanks. So it just, it was a bonehead thing. Not a bonehead thing. I just didn't want to spend the money to have it vented to the outside. And good thing, because I don't really use it anymore anyway, so it was just poorly designed. But yeah, so it definitely makes a difference in terms of the venting of the chillers. So speaking of sumps, I want to show off your. And this is going to be something we'll talk a lot about, Steve. It's just the cleanliness, of your setup, right? In terms of the equipment, it just looks like it's brand spanking new, and a lot of attention to detail. I don't see any detritus or any signs of anything. It's just very well built and very well thought out.
Yeah, thanks. Obviously, I have a problem. I am OCD. And if I see anything like that, I feel compelled that, okay, I've got to fix it. It's a problem. I have to fix it. I have to clean this. I have to fix this. And it's a hobby, so I don't mind. I don't look at it as a chore. It's a part of the gig. But if it isn't that way, it bothers me. It kills the enjoyment I have for the hobby. So that's just me.
Well, that's a good trait to have in reef keeping, because it can kind of like get a little squirrely, right? If you're not organized, and my setups can get a little squirrely, but yes, I commend you in terms of the cleanliness and the organization of the sump room there. So let's just kind of scroll through some of the pictures, and I think people are going to recognize this old tank. And talk to us, Steve, about the aquascaping for this old setup here. It's such a beautiful, natural-looking type of reef tank. Talk to us what you did about the rock work in there.
Okay, it's really interesting actually the way it evolved, because when I had the 500, I was like, okay, this is great. It's nice, although I had too much rock in there and not enough open space. And I was like, what really makes tanks is front to back depth. And nobody has it other than public aquariums. And I have the ability to do that with the space that I had and the construction skills that I have. So I go, I'm going to put in a tank that people don't have. More of a cube. Basically, it was 6 feet by 8 feet, 6 feet the left to right dimension, 30 inches high, front to back 8 feet. So that creates a whole new dimension. So how the aquascaping evolved, people think, oh, that's a canyon, great concept. Well, it kind of grew out of necessity. If you look at the tank, the way it is set up, I have a platform all around the tank. So I can service the tank by standing on that platform. People say, how can you reach? I could reach every inch of that tank.
Interesting.
Because imagine your tank sitting on the ground. Now how much can you reach rather than sitting on a ladder? So from the left side, I could reach basically, 36 inches into the tank. Well, from the other side, I could reach 36 inches into the tank. There's the 6 foot width. So I could reach everything. And if I have the center basically with nothing but sand that I really need to get to, I don't have to get there. Yeah. So the design kind of evolved as a means to be able to make everything accessible in the tank. And I had a hard time reaching the middle. Well, just don't put anything there. Just be an open space sand area. And then I also, back to my old days, and I used to work at Disneyland and forced perspective and whatnot. That's why it kind of is cone-shaped, where you kind of gives it an even greater depth by having it kind of like a funnel. Wide in the front, tighter to the back.
So Great Bearded Reef Paul, the moderator, is asking if this system was featured in Mike Paletta's Ultimate Marine Aquarium book. He thinks he remembers it back in the day. Was that featured, Steve, in that book?
Yes, it was actually, but not this one. The 500-gallon one was in Paletta's book. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's when his book out. I had the 500 one out. I hadn't gone to this one quite yet.
Well, I'll tell you, your aquascaping of that older tank certainly inspired me. I think pretty much every large reef tank that I had, and I'm talking about, in the 180 to 225 range. I've never gone bigger than 225. I'm not as bold as nearly as bold as you are, but I've always had like 2 islands, and I love that kind of gap in between the swim throughs. So
sure.
And I also am big proponent in terms of having the widest aquarium possible, and so I've had tanks that are 30 inches wide, and my latest tank, my Peninsula tank, is 36 inches wide. And I agree. I think it just really opens up the aquascaping so much.
Sure.
The more depth
Absolutely.
that you have, especially in a Peninsula tank, I think.
So this one here is 36 inches.
36 inches.
Inside dimension, so outside 38, but so inside 36.
And lo and behold, that looks very familiar in terms of that aquascape.
I think it's just the camera angle, but it does have elements. This is actually a pretty unique. I kind of came up with this aquascaping thing. I wanted to do something a little bit different than what traditional, because this tank operates as a peninsula tank, even though it's only viewable on 2 sides. But it operates because it has the overflow on this side, on the end. I can just kind of do this, and then you can see that behind that panel is where the overflow is.
Gotcha.
So it operates a little bit differently. I wanted to do something different with the aquascaping on this one. Everybody does the same thing for all the peninsula tanks I do. They basically put a little ribbon of rock down the middle and put all the corals on them, including Jake when I went and saw his and both his Red Sea and his water box. I went, oh, great. Same as everybody else. different. In fact, when the first time that I decided to come back, he was my first call. I called him up, because he and I kept in contact and visited each other even when I wasn't in the hobby, taking a break. And he was my first call, and I went, I want to do something different. He said, what are you doing coming back? And I go, well, I'm going to go mixed reef, because he was asking me, what I was going to come back as. And I goes, oh, okay, great. Let me know when you hit there. I'll give you corals, blah, 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 blah. What you going to do? I go, I want to do something different with the aquascape. I want to do something vertical. I want to do something with pinnacles. I'm tired of people saying the rockwork can only go up 20% of the tank or 25% of the surface. I want to bring rockwork to the surface. And I want more vertical surfaces, because I think it'll create interesting micro environments from both lighting and flow and everything else, that we can keep different things. And it'll also create a lot of negative space and swimming, and fish can circumnavigate.
And by the way, I'm showing the video of the 400-gallon tank you put together for us.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, okay, great.
Keep going.
So it is unique in that respect, but it's basically started off with this piece right here, this rock structure here onto my right here, and that is a single rock. And actually, it came out of my cold water tank. It's actually basalt.
Oh, really?
And so, yeah, it's actually out of Puget Sound. So it's basalt, and basically it's a bowling ball. It has no porosity at all. It's probably 85, 90 pounds. And I cut the base off it, and I stood it up vertically, plunk. And I went, oh, that fits perfectly. It takes me right up to the surface. It has some interesting things on it. All I had to do was add some kind of rocks around the bottom to soften it a little bit, kind of get rid of that kind of Easter Isle effect with a tiki sitting there. So, but it's really interesting in how that creates microenvironments going down. Up top, you have, Spathulata, Microcladus, Humulus, Gemmificara, all my high flow areas. Those things, last time I put a par meter on it, I was looking at basically 1,200 micromoles up here.
Wow.
Up here. And then when I get down to here, I'm down to, 250, 300, down the bottom, I'm about 200, because how everything shades everything else, including creating caves, which are basically zero for my non-photosynthetic stuff. And my flow is basically a gyre, but goes from top to bottom, not left to right. So those guys take the brunt of the flow, which is what they do in nature as well. So my highest flow area is with my high flow corals. And along with my gig carpet on the backside, who catches the benefit of it as well. He likes the high light too.
Love the carpet anemone.
Yeah, so that type of aquascaping created little microenvironments throughout the whole tank. And it's really worked out well. I didn't know how it would work out or how it would look. And what was fascinating to me is when I told Jake I was going to do that, he went, I'm doing the same thing. I went, what the hell? I just came up with it. How could you be doing the same thing? He goes, yeah, I'm going to be doing that. You can take a look at it when you come to visit the studio, and which we can talk about later, because when I went there, I went, yeah, okay,
so
not so
it's
much.
a little different.
A little bit different. We were talking apples and oranges. So, so that's how this evolved, with basically columns and bommies where the fish can circumnavigate around each one. They can get everywhere around here, including behind over here on that side. They can get behind there and around. So fish don't have to swim back and forth in this tank. They can swim through and around the reef a little bit more naturally.
So yeah, we're still running through we're about halfway through the video, Steve, and
Sure.
And we're seeing, just it's amazing in terms of the diversity of corals that you have in this. It's a true mixed reef tank, right? Because you've got the carpet anemone, you've got the ritterized, you've got the anemones in there. I see a lot of ganies. I see what are those the sun polyp corals.
Yeah. Dendrophilia,
right? A lot of zoanthids. You don't seem to be concerned about the zoanthids going on. And that's been my experience too in terms of zoas. Is that they don't seem to harm the other corals, and so yeah, you can kind of like let them go.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting story. As you know, I just created that video a couple weeks ago, and this big rock here that I have is basically a triangular rock. You can kind of see this face and you see the other face, but you can't see the third face. I had no idea what was going on there because it was just flat. I set it up that way. I didn't see what was going on there until I was filming with the in-tank GoPro and filmed the backside and went, where did all you guys come from? Holy crap, it's filled with zoos. I was like, okay, my Regal better start getting a taste for zoos or I'm going to be overrun with them.
That's right. You've got a Regal in there and you've got like a ton of zoanthids. How did you like manage that? I mean, geez.
Well, he doesn't touch them. I've never seen him bite one. I've got an emperor in there, a Morscheidel, and a Regal, which are all questionable fish. Yeah. All of them just want their frozen, their nori, and their scallop, and they don't look at anything else.
Intrinsic Reef, still inspiring the hobby after all these years. Flawless. Yes, I agree. Brian's Reef, does he ever frag that system? What?
Both intentionally and unintentionally.
Yeah, for sure. I also noticed that there was a very blue acro in there, the Oregon Blue Tort. Talk to us about that.
That's obviously my favorite coral. It's the only kind of what I consider untouchable coral. The other thing this system has, and a lot of my old 850 there was nothing cutting edge or extraordinary or designer or anything about the corals. We're talking Milka stylos, Bali green slimers, microcladus, Humulus, Jeremicara, gems. You know, there's no designer corals in here. There's no Walt Disney's, there's no Angry Birds, there's none of that kind of stuff in here. I prefer what appeals to me visually as they grow. I'm not really interested in the small stuff. So everything in here is pretty common. You know, there's nothing in here that's really designer in here at all. So I just kind of let it grow out. So yeah, so that's kind of the way this system is set up. Probably the most designer corals I have are the ones that Jake gave me. You know, when I went to him, back to the Oregon Blue Tort, the reason I went to visit him, this would have been spring 2022, yeah. And he wanted a few frags of mine because my Oregon Blue Tort is protein infected. And I got it. It was the first coral I put in the tank back in 2020 when this tank was started, December of 2020. And it's just an 1.5 inch frag. And it had a small little green wine stain on there, and I knew nothing about this. So I took a photograph to Jake. He sent it off to him, and he goes, "Wow, it's protein infected. I'll be really interested to see, you know, how it grows out." And then, of course, I got the tutorial of protein infections and everything else.
What is the cliff notes in terms of a protein infected coral?
He was saying it's mostly going to be the green pigment of the, and it probably got infected from whoever brought in that frag, and it got infected from it, absorbed that protein from another green coral. Maybe it was a Bacillopora, maybe it was whatever it was, but it took it into its tissues as its own. And then grows from there. So it's not grafted where you're basically gluing two pieces together. It's a part of its biology. So it's interesting how they grow out. And in this case, that little kind of dots on a couple corallites grew out into a whole section here that's green-ish. It's still mottled. It still has blue in it. The polyps are still blue like an Oregon tort, but the whole section is green. So that was the reason I went out there, was to take him a few frags of that because he wanted a part of the protein-infected areas to grow out. So, and then, of course, you know, I didn't want anything from him or anything, but on the way home, you know, it was the last day in there, and he goes, "Okay, here, I got this for you and this for you, and take some of this and take some of this." So
what did you score from Jake?
I have his Immortal Tort. I have his Hoaxamai, his Crystal Experiment, Humulus, Gem, Samacora. I think that's it. I think there's another one. Oh, there's around the corner. Yeah, around the corner there was a Bacillopora edu, kind of like a cat's paw.
Yep.
That you'd see kind of growing in Hawaii type thing.
Is that the bright pink one?
Mine is bright green, but they can be pink. His was that one, and actually it was a colony he was actually buying at the time, a small little colony at Mile High Reefers, I think it was, that we were at. And he just basically cut it in half and said, "Here, take this half." Okay. So now it's like, okay, I'm really kind of glad that happened because I kind of have something that kind of is important to me now.
A couple of comments from the viewers. Chris at ACI commenting on the corals that you selected there, Steve, and Tank. Corals you can appreciate from across the room, for sure. Exactly. Gene Plotkin, Steve's 850 gallon is still the best tank I've ever seen. Spent a lot of time back in the day looking at it. Good old Reef Central days. Yeah, that was just like a really truly inspiring tank. Are you how would you say this tank, your current tank, stacks up to the 850? Would you say that you are as pleased in terms of where it's at currently? Do you think it is going to be a better reef tank than what you had? You know, I mean, I personally, for my tanks, I can kind of like say, you know, I think this is like the best tank I've ever had, type of thing. Is that something that you ever think about?
Well, I really don't, because it's apples and oranges. You're talking something less than half the size of the other.
Yeah.
So your opportunities for what you can do are so much less. One of the reasons that I kind of appreciate this tank is it's much more relatable to everybody else's tank out there. This tank dimension, although still a little on the larger side, it's still roughly similar proportions to everybody else's tank out there. Whereas my other one was basically a small closet, you know, so it is not relatable to anybody else. So when you have that much space, it's pretty hard to screw it up visually. You have so much room to
Now,
do.
listen, man,
you
gotta have the touch. You gotta have the touch for something like that, and obviously you've got the talent and the what do they call it? The not the green thumb, the blue thumb. You know, so all right, there's so much to talk about here, Steve. But somebody, I saw a comment in the chat about flowing a peninsula tank. There was a question from Problem Prone ReefBum. Is it possible to have power heads only at one end of a 5-foot peninsula and achieve good random flow, or should I put some on the viewing panel end? I have 2 MP40s and 2 hydros, gyros on one end now. So, you know, if you weren't on the show right now, Steve, we could talk about you know, putting power heads on the viewing end panel of a peninsula tank. I mean, I do it. I've got a 6-foot long peninsula tank, and I've got 2 MP40s on the viewing end panel. But Steve has this talent of not having any visible power heads or wires in his tanks. And we talked at length about this at Reef Stock, and I'm going to show a picture of the circulation chamber. We've got a Versa pump in there. So that's kind of a bit of a behind it's behind the panel. I guess you've got a panel that covers that up. But
right here to my left.
Talk to us about what you do in terms of hiding all the power heads and wires and such a clean look.
Okay, so first off, I can't possibly stomach any visual pollution in the tank. So that's no plumbings, no power heads, no wires. To me, that is a zit on the Mona Lisa. That is not going to be in my DNA to do. So I will find ways around it.
You are unique, sir. And you are very unique in that sense. I don't know anybody else that can do it as well as you can do that.
So I designed this system, back to my cold water system, is designed it how I did it. But again, the flow is basically top to bottom. And everybody's peninsula tank, and mine being no different, has a center overflow at one end, which creates 2 alcoves on the left and right. Everyone has it. And that's just dead space. Well, when I designed this tank and had it built, I had that front wall, rather than creating the 2 alcoves, just go straight across, and now you have 2 wet chambers. And that created a spot where I could put 2 now very powerful. I don't use, quote, power heads. I'm actually using Vectra L2s. So
Vectors.
These are pretty powerful pumps. And, you know, we're talking 3,000 plus gallons per hour shooting through theirs. And there's 3 of them in the tank. So that's creating the flow on a, you know, the Mobius reef crest. So it's variable the flows. And it's powerful enough between those 3, when they sync up, I get a whirlpool at the other end. It'll go all the way down to the bottom. So
mechanically, what's going on? You've got these chambers, you've got the pumps that are pointing downwards. All 3 pumps are pointing downwards. And
no, that's the intake.
That's the intake. Okay, so that's the intake. Yeah. I got you. All right.
The nozzle is pointing out through the wall, which is going through rockwork. And when I created the end rockwork, I created multiple holes on there. So you can't guess which one is the flow coming out of. It's completely hidden. And to tell you how OCD I am, when I first did it, I went, oh God, the volute is white and I can see the volute. God, I got to fix that. I can't take it. So I covered it up and I'm, okay, that works. But the inside of the volute is still white, and I can now see that. So I took a black piece of vinyl tubing and stuffed it in there. It's a little bit like putting your finger over the hose, and it completely blacked it out.
You truly are OCD.
You cannot see it. It really was. So it completely blacked it out, and now it's perfect. But the other thing that's important with it, it's truly accessible. All I have to do is reach down, pull it out, clean it, put it back in. And those chambers actually kind of look like, or kind of act like catch basins. All the detritus in the tank kind of collects in the bottom of those. So during a water change, I'll just vacuum out the bottom. In fact, I'll show you on the intake. I'm just going to leave the camera here very quickly, right next to me here. And I'm going to grab what an intake screen is because I forgot to bring it out. This here is at the base of each of those chambers. This is the intake screen. These are spare ones, and they just sit in the bottom of the chamber. This is where water's sucking in from behind the rockwork into here, and then flowing out up top, shooting out. So I have this circular motion. This also provides the perfect spot to put your return from the sump. I don't need to have nozzles and look at nozzles coming from the sump into the tank, nor have any of the back siphoning during a power outage. They just dump into each of the chambers on both sides, and I let the power, the vector
return
pumps.
nozzles are above the water line.
Correct. Okay. And it flows into both sides. And I don't put a whole lot of water through the sump, just enough to keep the heater and make the heater and chiller effective. So we're probably putting through maybe 2,000 gallons an hour, if
so
that.
No possibility of any back siphoning.
Oh, God, no. It only fills up. My sump is 200 gallons of itself, and I'd only fill it up maybe 2/3 the way on a power outage. You know, it doesn't fill up. So that I designed that way back from the cold system. So this system inherited those dynamics, but it works perfectly. So there is nothing in the tank. There's no plumbing in the tank. There's very little plumbing anywhere here. It just drops down to the sump, comes right back up.
Let me. I'm going to just kind of roll the video again here and fast forward to the equipment, the stuff, the support equipment you call it. And so we're taking a look at the sump, and again, it's just super clean looking in there. I see you got a couple of filter socks. You've got some sort of reactor going on there. I see you got a filter roller. So you're doing the filter roller. Talk to us instead of me trying to like figure all this stuff out. Talk to us about the
Sure. Well, first of all, the filter roller, it wasn't always that way. Originally, it was just going through some media floss, whatnot. It was Jake who turned me on to the filter rollers when I visited him, and I looked at his, and I went, oh, I can incorporate those into mine. So it's only about 1.5 years I've been running that since, I visited him. So that was a relatively recent addition, is I go, oh, I can just have everything go through the filter roller going through there. And then it goes through, it drops down from there, and then it goes through, another chamber. It has the skimmer, and it's a Bubble King 250 Deluxe. So it's a pretty powerful skimmer. My cold water tank required that because of how much feeding was necessary. And this tank has a lot of feeding from the various things I'm trying to keep, including non-photosynthetic, dendro. So I feed a lot, which means I have nutrient problems. I don't have zeroing out on anything. I have the opposite problem. Phosphates running high and nitrates running high. So I run a sulfur reactor to keep them at bay. And I also dose lanthanum chloride, which is the filter sock. Everything goes through a 5 goes through a 5 micron sock before going back up into the tank. So, and that keeps my phosphate at bay too. So I did a test before our show here. My phosphate is currently at 0.08. My nitrate 7.2. Alkalinity was 8.7. Calcium was 400. Magnesium was 1400. That's pretty much it. So normal stuff.
DKH, did you mention the alkalinity? I might have missed it.
Yeah, 8.7. 8.7.
Yeah. Wow, lanthanum chloride, man. That's you got to know what you're doing with that stuff, right? I mean, you got to be careful with that.
Well, that isn't the only thing I don't say you have to be careful with.
Oh, do tell.
All right. Well, if you want to kind of move on to pH, because to me, I don't care much about alkalinity. I've never cared much about alkalinity. As long as it doesn't get too high, get up to like 13, 14, something like that, then the corals start burning and everything else. I don't really care about alkalinity. Look at the ocean. What's the ocean? 6.5, 7, type thing. So pH is what matters to me, and always has. For some reason, the world has started to become alkalinity fixated, and I'm not sure why. To me, they should be pH fixated. So back to my air exchange, that was a thing of pH. So the next issue, because that doesn't get me there, because I do run a calcium reactor, and I run the same calcium reactor that Jake was using as his favorite.
We were talking about that at the studio, man. You were just like said, by and far, it is like the most incredible calcium reactor you've ever run. I mean, they're not cheap. No. But to me, they are so well worth it. The Deltec Twin Tech. And they're so worth it because there's only one parameter, one variable. How much effluent do you want? No drip rates, none of that, no bubble counts, none of that. All you do is hook it up, set it, and forget it. And if you need some more effluent, hit the button and dial it up or dial it down. That's all you have to do. So it's so slick. What about cleaning it? Is that a pain in the ass, or you do no?
Nope. Comes apart right easily.
Yeah.
In fact, I just filled it up about a week ago, so it's getting a little low. So no big deal. Just run Reborn. So no big deal. Throw in some, dolomite or something for magnesium. Help with a little bit with that. But really slick. But it performs by supersaturating the chamber with CO2. So that's why you don't have a bubble count or anything else. So the effluent, you're dumping some CO2 into the tank, even if you go through, a secondary chamber, it still comes out. Now, when I visited Jake, he was having the exact same problem, and we were both independently trying to tackle the problem. He first tackled it by sending it through a skimmer, which promptly fouled up his pump and seized it up. So he goes, oh, that didn't work. Then he was putting it through, Chitomorpha. And that's great too, but it can only suck up so much. And it's really all about dwell time. Even in a skimmer, it's only in there a few seconds. It just doesn't get enough time to off gas. So what I did on my tank, you kind of show it in the side view video there, is since I have excess space in my sump, I created a side chamber there that my calcium reactor dumps into, and it just has a massive air stone under there, and it's like a washing machine there. And the only water that enters that chamber is from the calcium reactor, so it has a long dwell time before it spits out into the main tank. That gave me a 0.15 bump across the board just doing that. And that brought me to a range of 8.2 to 8.3, but I really want to be 8.3 to 8.4. So for the last 8 months now, I have been dosing sodium hydroxide. And that has brought me, now my pH never drops below 8.3. That is my lowest it'll ever go, and it's usually 8.33, 8.34. My highs are in the mid 8.4s. And after I did that, the tank changed visually. And I'm not a big one for you look at it every day. How do you see changes? Like watching grass grow, but a week later you see it really grew. But tanks are the same way. I've noticed a huge difference out of that. Now, sodium hydroxide is nasty stuff. You get so much as a drop of it on you, you're going to know it. And how you deliver it is really, really important. Everybody, you know that if you have anything that's highly alkaline, pH 14 high, pH of 14 or something, and you put it in our tank, it immediately creates a precipitation at the nozzle. You can see it. It immediately clouds in those areas. We try to put it in high flow areas and disperse it as quickly as possible. So I knew I had to do that. So I was going, okay, maybe I'll put it in my return or my line coming down. Oh no, I better not put it in a pipe, because I bet you that precipitation eventually is going to be like an Indiana Jones and create a ball of goo. I could just see that happening, and I won't be able to see it or anything else. So I go, no, I'm not going to do that. So what I did is I have just a circulation pump. It's about 2,000 gallons an hour. It basically supplies to my reactors. I run ozone, runs this little bit. So I have a lot of excess capacity. I put it through a filter stock, dumping into a filter stock, and that's where I dump the sodium hydroxide. So it mixes in the sock, so any precipitate is going to be stuck in the sock, in a 10 micron sock, and not go anywhere. And there's no impact on the tank at all. And it isn't much. I run it from about 9 at night to about 7 in the morning. Every hour it dumps in, I think, 8 milliliters is currently where I have it. So every hour it gives a little drop, and you can see it on my Apex thing as it goes down. It gets down to 9 o'clock, then it starts going all the way across, and never gets below 8.3 until the lights come back on. Then it goes up. So far that's been working out so good. And sodium hydroxide.
What's the risk if that stuff gets into the system? What can happen?
I really can't see anything other than because I have mine delivered through a Versa pump. So the only thing is if the actual tubing, which is, reverse osmosis tubing, thick polypropylene tubing, it's not going to, I guess it could burn a hole in that and dump a little bit in, but I would catch it long before then because the Versa is only putting in a little bit at a time. And I don't keep the pumps or anything near the water, so create a mess on the floor. So you're right, it could be a point of failure, but if you design it, you can work around that. But I know it's kind of controversial and kind of thing, but it's worked out well for me. So far, I've been running, like I said, about 8 months, but I never fall below 8.3. So now we're talking kind of ideal what the oceans would gonna see. I'm not dropping way down there. So it's really worked out well for me from that standpoint so far, and I see no different changes. It's so easy, it's user friendly. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. So is the use of the lithium chloride, did you try other methods in terms of trying to get the phosphates down before you went to the lithium chloride, or did you kind of know with the design of the system in terms of the circulation chambers that would potentially be something adding phosphate to the system that you would need to kind of break out the big guns, so to speak?
Sure. It's not so much for the design of the system being able to handle it or nutrient export. I export in so many different ways on this tank, little bits here and there. It's the feeding that I do between, look how many large anemones I have, big boy anemones that are now, 1.5 feet across, plus dendros that I'm feeding kind of, every couple, 3 nights. There's a lot of input, so that output is not being able to take care of. So lithium chloride is the best. I'm sure I could use ROA or something like that, but it's hard to meter, it's hard to regulate, it's expensive, it's not user friendly. This, all I do, as soon as I get it dialed into how much I need, and it dumps in a little squirt every hour, and I dump it into my filter roller at the top of it. So first it goes through the filter roller, and then it goes through the skimmer, and then it goes through a 5 micron before it gets out to the next, where the return pump can take it back into the tank. So I think I can get everything out. But it's been running that way probably for a year now, and I've had no issue other than I can maintain my phosphate right around 0.08, 0.1. And I can tweak it if I want to by adjusting the lithium chloride. It's hard to tweak ROA.
Yeah. And so the key with the lithium is to basically make sure that absolutely no precipitate gets into the system, correct?
Yes.
Right, or else that could be deadly to the fish.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it can stick to their gills, and tangs especially are susceptible to it. So, and I have a number of tangs in here, and they've never had any issue or problem. So,
all right, there's bacteria. That's another question I had for you. Let's talk about bacteria. Sure. Do you do any bacteria dosing to the tank? If so, why? And have you played around with that stuff at all?
I have not. The only areas I've kind of thought about, and I think I tried it once or twice, is when it's being paired with calcium carbonate. It's kind of a
coral snow type of thing.
Yeah, coral snow in the tank, and try that for clarity and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I didn't see much of a difference. But on the other hand, I run UV and ozone, so how much clearer was it going to get, type thing. But I haven't done any bacteria dosing. Mostly, I think my bacteria has come from, one, I started the tank with a portion of true live rock, Florida live rock. I used actually 3 kinds of rock when I started this tank. Puget Sound out of my old tank. A little bit of dry rock that I used, kind of the flat plate rocks to create my side panels over here. And then some Florida live rock. So I think most of mine came from there, started from there. And of course, live sand, which I've used, the Florida live sand. I think that's where it's come from. But I haven't been into the bacteria dosing things. I really haven't seen the need for it.
Gotcha. So. I want to talk about one thing that is kind of jumping back again in terms of the power heads and the no visible power heads and lines. Tell us you told me this funny story when we were talking at the studio when you came into Jake's place there and you looked at his tank, and tell the story in terms of what you said to Jake and how he reacted.
Well, first I got lots of Jake stories. Going through there, we're going around to it, and sometimes I just get great pleasure in kind of poking the bear, a little bit, because he knows my buttons to push, and I know his. So I know that when I was coming there, he knows how anal I am on both like wire control and power heads and everything else, and also coralline algae and detritus and everything else. So I walked into the studio right away, and I could already tell that he's been spending the last week doing nothing but cleaning. Yeah. So anyway, so he walked into the studio and immediately went over to his Peninsula tank and his water box tank. And he's like showing it off, everything. He's saying, I really like to clean the tanks. I really got it ready for you. You're not going to find anything wrong. And I went, well, what about that power head? And what about this little patch of core line? And okay, let's go over and look at that tank now. That I can see that you didn't clean it. And why isn't that skimmer cleaned out and is overflowing? You
got him.
Gives me great pleasure. Yeah. So we have a lot of things like that. But to kind of come back full circle back on the aquascaping, I don't know if you remember when you were there, when you walk in the studio on the right-hand side, he had a somewhat cubish tank, but it was a tank that he was keeping Trachyphilias, Scalemias, all that kind of stuff, kind of the lower light, kind of, some Blastos and whatnot. And that was a tank that, back to where we originally started, that he was saying, I'm doing vertical aquascaping. So I was really curious. That was the first thing I wanted to see. Where's this vertical aquascaping? How's it comparing to mine? And I went in there, and what he had done is he had taken some plate rock, and he glued it together, and he put corals on it, and he tipped it up. And I looked at it, and he's like, what do you think? I go, kind of looks like a display at a Dunkin' Donuts. That's what it really looks like to me. It's like, what the hell? All you had to do is take a big rock, cut it off, plant it in the middle. Now you have this perfect surface to put everything around it. It'll look natural. Fish can swim around it. No dead spots. Water flow around it. It's like, yeah, not so much. I don't like it. But he got me back literally about 10 minutes later. He was talking about, hey, there's this really interesting Coral ID book out. You really ought to consider getting it. It's really easy to use. Now, first off, I have always used Jake as my Coral ID. Yeah. If I see something in the store, snap a picture, text it off, come back, I get a full Wikipedia page out of it. Details everything. So I don't need it. But anyways, he goes, it's a really easy Coral ID. I go, okay. So what you're saying is, you think I need a Coral ID for Dummies book? Is that what you're saying? While you're at it, Jake, just hand me a coupon for Weight Watchers too, He goes, no, I'm not thinking that. And I go, yeah, I know you aren't, just because I told you you'd look like Dunkin' Donuts. So we kind of always go back and forth a little bit on that. But everyone thinks Jake was pretty anal, and he was. There's no doubt about it. But I'm worse.
Yeah, no, you can definitely tell that going to the studio that things were really well put together. But I'm sure if we toured your place there, Steve, then that would be to a whole nother level, it looks like. And speaking of cleanliness and whatnot, I just can't help but noticing the sand bed behind you in that tank, and also the sand bed in the 850. Talk to us about what you do with sand beds.
Okay, first off, I cannot stomach or tolerate bare bottom tanks. I mean, they're fine. To me, they become coral displays. It's there to display the coral. That's what Jake's tank was. Jake hated sand, not so much because it looked bad, but what it did for the corals. And there's absolutely no disagreement with that. Sand is problematic. It's not good for anything other than our eye. So it creates all kinds of problems. You just can't set it and forget it. It's going to create you drama and all kinds of problems. If you go diving and in the sandy areas, okay, it's kind of dead barren area for a reason. Sand, not good for your tank, but it's good for our eye. It basically provides relief from the eye, and I'm all about the presentation and the display of the tank, not the individual corals. So from Jake's standpoint, he liked the individual singers. I prefer the chorus. So everybody together, what they're doing. So for sand, I've got to have sand in there in some manner. It provides light, get a little more bounce, visually, the whole thing. So, but it comes with drama and everything else. There's no doubt about it. So I have to have a little bit of sand in there. So, but I also was going to take the opportunity to kind of poke Jake a little bit too. After his ill-fated trip to Bali, he and Windsor were going to come out and visit me. They were planning a trip to come out to Oregon. We were going to go out to the Oregon coast, and he was actually going to do a thing on this tank here, and we're all doing kind of things there. But I was already prepping for his visit, and they're staying with me. I had changed my guest Wi-Fi password to "Sand is required" with 3 exclamation points.
That's awesome.
If you let them type that in every day. So never try to miss an opportunity.
That is very clever, man. That is very clever.
So, but yeah, there's no doubt, sand. We're in full agreement that sand is not really healthy, doesn't provide any benefit other than visually. And since I'm all about the visual product, I'll do what I need to do to compensate for that. Whereas Jake is, just pull the sand.
So how do you maintain such a clean sand bed? What's the, do you have the cleanup crew?
I stir it.
Okay.
No, the best cleanup crew is me. The best controller, me. So I only have a few snails in here. There's really not much, but I'm in there pretty much every day, and I'm always tweaking. There's not much sand here. It's really thin. You know, I pile it up a little bit for some of my wrasses, and I'll just stir it around for a little bit when I'm kind of dicking around.
Are you siphoning it? You're just stirring it.
Just stirring it. And my dendros like it, so when I start stirring it, they come out. And it'll just hit the overflow. And about once a week or so, when I'm doing a little bit more in-depth cleaning, I'll throw on a diatomaceous filter, dump it in the tank while I'm cleaning, and that'll help out too. I'll do a little bit of that. But mostly it just kind of goes over the overflow and seems to work out pretty good. But yeah, I maintain it. If I were to take a turkey baster now and stand it, it would hardly fog the tank.
Wow. So the large amount of flow that you have in that tank, you're not constantly, having the sand bed get moved around?
No. Right now you can see there's quite a bit of flow by how much is moving in here. Occasionally at the very end I might get a little bit, but this is a pretty coarse sand, so it's a little bit heavier. It's not like an Ulith or even like a Fiji pink or anything. The Florida live sand actually can be pretty chunky. So I think it does the job. It's a little darker and grayer than I've used in the past. On my old systems, I always use the Fiji pink. But this system here, I'm using the Florida live sand, and I kind of learned to like it. I kind of like the diversity of it. Because one thing, with all its diversity, I don't feel inclined to pick out little things like, oh, there's a dot, I need to pick it out. Now it's dots everywhere. That's better. Okay, I
kept the messiest sand beds. I would bump into a coral or something like that. So I would have coral fragments, I'd have dead snails and all that stuff. It would have driven you bananas looking at my sand beds. Oh. So I pulled all my sand beds. So I had been running sand beds for years and years and years, but now I have all bare bottom. So yeah, you wouldn't be a fan of that, but it's I find it easier in terms of being able to get the detritus out and all that stuff, and
absolutely, it is easier.
It's definitely more efficient in that regard. But
no
kudos
doubt
to you, man, in terms of being able to have such a brilliant looking sand bed. And I've seen some folks that are read about people siphoning sand beds and a section at every other day or whatnot. But obviously, I think if you have the good flow on that system, if you're shifting it around or sifting it around and getting that detritus into the water column, then that does the trick. Do you also do you ever take a power head to the rock structure and blow detritus off the rock work?
Absolutely, I do. Take a little maxi jet, go around there and blow it around there. I'll do that a couple times a week. I usually do water changes about once every month-ish, 4 to 6 weeks, and that's a good time to really kind of spray off all those rocks with a power head. And usually, always when I do that at the time, I'll run an auxiliary filter on there just while I'm cleaning to kind of catch all that. Just using those little marine land canister filters into the tank.
Yes.
Because you can fill those with diatomaceous earth.
Right.
So, which I do, and works out pretty good. It pulls out quite a bit. Those little guys pull out quite a bit.
Yeah,
so.
I actually have one myself, and I do the same exact thing. I'll blow the rocks with a little MaxiJet power head. Even the bottom, if there's some detritus that's hanging around the bottom, if I don't siphon that stuff out, and I put one of those marine land little filters in the tank and let it run
they were great.
Let it run for a few hours, and there's a lot of stuff that comes out of that gets caught.
Yeah, it really works well. So I do that. So so it's multiple things, but I'm pretty much in there every day, doing something, tweaking here, tweaking there, because it's a hobby. If you don't like being in there, maybe hobby's not for you.
This is not a lazy man's hobby, right? This is something that you really need to be very active and engaged, and you need to be looking at the tank all the time. It's not something where you can kind of just sit back and relax and let things do their thing. It's a living, breathing thing, these reef tanks that we have.
And it changes over time. So to me, it's living art. And that artwork, you know, instead of our medium being paint, it's coral and rock.
Yeah.
And it changes all the time. So we always have to do something. Unfortunately, it kind of success breeds that you have to tear it down, you know. So here you get a huge column, like a little Milka Stylo over here, which started off as a little itty bitty guy, is now, I don't know, 16, 17 inches across. It's like, oh boy, someday I'm going to have to do something. And I'd rue the day when I have to do that. I like you now, but it's going to become a problem.
I know. I've got a Milka Stylo in my Peninsula tank that's just gotten so huge. I've got an orange cap on the one on the other side of the tank that is just, you know, it's cupping along up the overflow and all that stuff. And got to start breaking some pieces off of that sucker, or else it'll be a tank full of orange cap. You know?
Oh yeah.
You know.
Jake always said, if you leave your tank alone, you're just going to be stuck with one coral in the tank.
very, very well said.
There's going to be one winner.
Yeah. Speaking of winners and losers, how do you manage with the anemones, the carpet and the rittereye? You know, those are tough corals to keep in a mixed reef, correct?
Tough anemones to keep in a mixed reef, yeah. So the key is understanding their requirements. And especially magnificas, the rittereyes, and the gigs. They're known for walkabouts and moving and everything. Well, they're moving because they're not happy. So from the very beginning, I provided them what I consider to be their ideal spot. Like if you look at my Magnifica over here, you know, so you can see from the picture how bright it is over him. There is right over him a radium XR30 directly over him, really white light, and inches from him. It's about 900 micromoles on the par meter right at his top tentacles there. And he's in a high flow area on top of a peninsula. Anywhere he goes, or on top of an outcropping, anywhere he goes is going down, so he's not going to want to do it. I put him there basically almost 3 years ago. He was one of the first things I put in the tank. He hasn't moved since. So, and the same with the gig. I always, they want to be high up, they want to be in flow. And I guess in the wild, a lot of times they're on vertical surfaces. So I go, ooh, I got some vertical surfaces. And I planted him. He's been there ever since, although he's also starting to get enormous. So, but he stays right there at the end of that. It's a perfect spot for him. So if you provide them with what they want to be in, they're not going to move on you. Now the Hedonis at the bottom, sometimes they can move. And they'll shift left or right or a little bit, especially if they get near a coral. My blue one here my torch is kind of getting too big over there. I might have to kind of frag him back a little bit. But when he starts touching the blue carpet loses. And he'll start shifting over to the left or right. So if I want him to stay where he is, I just have to make sure nobody bothers him.
Is the best thing to put anemones in at the beginning?
You know, it's controversial either way. A lot of people want to really mature tanks, and I'm sure there's some benefit to that. I really don't think there's any rhyme or reason going in there. I think really what it is collecting healthy stocks to begin with. Now, a big change that's happened since I had anemones in the 2000s, of course, is, you know, the antibiotics, the Cipros and the oxalic acids and whatnot, especially the Cipro for anemones, especially the mags and the gigs. I picked up that mag on the cheap because it was completely bleached white. It was, you know, already on its way out, and I took it home. I Cipro'd it for a couple weeks, and I've had it ever since. So it wouldn't have lasted a few more days in the store when I had it there. So that is something that wasn't available to us back in the day. And we'd get gigs, you get like 4 or 5, 6 of them, and hopefully one survives. So that's no longer the case. We have pretty good success rate with it now. I think it's more along the lines of not so much the tank, but the specimen that you're getting.
How many pairs of clownfish do you have in that tank?
I have a threesome over here going on in this one here, and then just a one guy over here. Those guys over there lay eggs pretty consistently under there.
Threesome, huh?
This, wow. There's a threesome. It started off as 4 that I thought two would go one and 2 would go the other, but nope, threesome there and a lone dude over there. So
interesting.
So, you never know how it works out, but they've been there, and they're pretty protective of that anemone. If I get too close, I start getting bit. So no doubt.
There you go. You got to watch out. All right, a question from one of the viewers, Reef Ghost. Oregon Reef, how do you feel about the local/state scene here in Oregon? Can't seem to find anything but Facebook groups, and they're nowhere near the Cali scene. What's going on there in terms of local reef keeping scene there?
Oh, I am so the wrong person to ask. Let's just say if I were to have an avatar, it would be a hermit crab. So. I'm just not that big on the boards, or, I participate occasionally in our local fish club, Pacific Marine Aquarium Society. It's a pretty good club, and they have, monthly meetings, and they do some interesting things, going to the Oregon Coast Aquarium, Hatfield Center, some local flag swaps. But I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram.
But you got a website.
I can't even get the I do have a website, but I didn't even create it. I have a buddy of mine who said, you have to have a website. And I said, okay, go ahead. I'll create the data and you can put it together. And it's been there ever since, and it auto renews, and I just
I was going to say, Steve, 1990 is calling, and your website.
Exactly.
Or whatever
But every March it comes around and auto renews before I catch it. Oh, I missed it again. So one of these days, but it still gets traffic. So I go, well, I guess maybe somebody's getting out of it. But yeah, it's not going to stay up there forever. Eventually, I'm going to take it down because it's so antiquated. But there's still useful information there. If you can get past the kind of the old Star Trek button kind of look thing on there, But yeah, so it certainly is dated. But hey, everything old is new again. Maybe it'll come around and
retro
be popular
website.
Again. Yeah, exactly. Look at that. Wow, you really captured 2000.
So one topic that you and I were talking about earlier this week when we were kind of testing out the connection with the live stream here is UV. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about your little experiment. You were using UV, but then you stopped using UV. What did you learn with that experiment?
Really interesting, and I didn't expect these results at all. It kind of took me back. But I have always used UV. Even all my past systems, I always use just a boatload of UV. This system's no different. It was using basically 120 watts of UV on this system. It's basically 2 of those 57-watt Aqua UVs in series. So one runs into the next before it pees out. So at a fairly slow rate. So it's really nuking that water that goes through it. So the latest is, the aquabiomics testing. And I've done now 3 of them. The first ones were dealing with oxalic acid experiment. But the last one, when I was done with that, I went, it came back on my reports on the aquabiomics that I had a very minimal amount of what they consider maybe a good bacteria, or the Pelagioli bacteria, that pink layer. And I had next to nothing because I run UV. So tank is styling, moving along great, everything. I'm going, I'm going to run an experiment. This is just this last, May-ish. I go, I'm going to turn off my UV for, 6 to 8 weeks and see what happens if that, and then run another aquabiomics report and see what the changes are. So I did that, and I recently got back the results. It was only like a week or so ago, and I was kind of shocked. One, that quote, good bacteria layer was a little bit bigger. It's probably double or triple from where it was originally, and if I keep going on. However, suddenly I now have 3 flavors of cyanobacteria in the tank that I've never had before. It always came back 0. 5th pathogens, which, in fact, I even have it written down here. Originally on a fish pathogen was 0.003. Next, on the recent one, post-UV, 0.4.
Wow, that's a big jump.
Huge jump. And same with the coral, the Shemia coral pathogen that was negligible, 0.001. It's now like, okay, 0.02. It just went up too. And I went, what the hell? And the other thing that was a kicker for me was during this entire time, and it was just flummoxing me, is my dendrophilias, fathead dendros, weren't coming out at all. They're usually always out at night, and I can coax them out during the day. And all while creating that video, I did my damnedest to try to get them to come out. I'd put everything I could smelly in that tank, and I couldn't get them out because I wanted to film them. It's like, what in the hell's going on with these guys? And all of them, and I have a little batch here and a little batch there. Within 48 hours of pulling the UV back online, they're fully out. And you can even see them now that I don't have any food in the water. They're already starting to come out on that side there for the nighttime, in the daytime. So now it's observational, and I can't put anything, but it's enough to me. And the other thing is my Achilles tang here suddenly during this time started occasionally flashing.
Yeah.
And I've already seen him flash once or twice. It's nothing big, and he doesn't have any other thing on there, and he seems fine, but occasionally started to flash. That never happened before. So, yes, that bacterial layer might be beneficial, but I think I'm getting more beneficial from other parameters that are now allowed to roam free in the tank. So I'm going to run it this way with the UV back on for another 6 to 8 weeks or so, and then run another report and see if it's changed any.
Yeah, interesting.
See if I've gone back to baseline, because all my other reports were zeroed out. No cyano, minimal fish pathogens, hardly registering, minimal coral pathogens, hardly registering. Suddenly, here they all are.
But of course, cyano does not dare show its presence on your sand bed, right? Because it's your pristine tank, so they wouldn't even show themselves, but it came up on the report, right? So
exactly. I didn't see anything, but there is no unauthorized algae growth or cyano in the tank.
Yeah,
so.
How do you manage that? How do you manage like absolutely no nuisance algae in that tank? I'm assuming you don't have any nuisance algae. I mean, have you?
No.
Okay.
Occasionally in little spots, you get a little Briopsis or something like little heritage algae spots or something, or a spot that maybe a tang can't get to up near the top of the rocks or something. And I'll just use a little, brush and brush those out occasionally that nobody can get to take care of. But when I design the system in the aquascaping, I make sure everything's accessible. Otherwise, it becomes a chore. If things aren't accessible, it becomes a chore and you don't do it. So I have to have a clean background. I mean, you have to look at any coral vendor on this planet is not showing off their corals with a coralline background. It's always going to be a clean background because it offsets the corals. Yeah. It shows them off in a way that is not capable with a coralline background. And to me, it doesn't look natural. It's flat. Maybe if it was a rocky surface coralline, hey, I'm all for it. But when it's flat like that, to me, it's artificial and fake. And not that a black background is all that great and wonderful, but it's the closest thing we have to offset the corals. It just
makes them pop.
Yeah, makes them pop. Yeah. And there's a reason why photography is done that way against that black background. That's the reason. So I've got to have it. So I make sure my aquascaping is pulled off the back where I can just take a mop, just boop, 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 mop the back. Just takes a few seconds. And I do that every couple days. So really, it's not that hard, but to me, it makes all the difference in the world when you look at the tank from a distance. So, and it was an issue with my old tank, the 850. It was a clear back on my 850, but I put a black panel that you see in the pictures. It was a little tiny 1/8 inch panel that I could pull off and back for looking at maintenance and everything else. And it also created that infinite depth. If I were to do that today, though, I would do it completely different. Something I couldn't do back then. These days, what I do for that area is I'd put a big screen TV in the back and run a continuous loop of a deep ocean scene.
Oh, wow.
And then when the TV's off, it would be blacked out. When the TV's on,
now
have an ocean scene going in the back.
That's being innovative, man. That's innovative thinking right there.
Yeah. If I were to do it these days, I always wanted to do that, but it wasn't practical back in the 2000s. Now you can get these big 70-inch screen TVs, and that are all relatively easy. And I'd put it on a continuous loop. So that's what I'd do today. And if anyone does that, I want royalties.
You get credit for that one. John writes, comment, Steve, do you look at your tank every day and think, wow, because I do, and it's nothing like yours?
Well, there's no doubt I look at it every day and several times a day. You're always looking at it, and you always have those things in the middle of the night. Ooh, what's going on? Oh, I got to go down and check on it. Type thing, no doubt about it. I do keep a webcam on
Oh, you do?
Yeah, so I have a webcam up there that shows it. So at least when I'm kind of traveling or not around or during the day.
Private webcam? Okay.
Yeah.
You got to make that public, man.
So just so I can. No. I'm not always wearing pants. Okay. Well, you don't need that. So during the day, I can kind of check on it and kind of like, let's just turn on the camera and see what are they doing in there.
Do you have a webcam on your sump as well?
Well, this one here, I can scroll the camera on it. So it's a movable camera. So I can scroll it around. In fact, I can scroll it around the whole garage if I wanted to. So, and it's also a zoom one. So I can scroll down and zoom in on the sump. So
I've got, I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 webcams. So I've got one on each display tank, the 2 display tanks, and I've got another that's eyeballing the 3 frag tanks in the frag tank room, and then I've got one each for my sumps. So it's not very efficient, but I've got eyes on everything, when I'm away, which is good,
peace of mind.
It is.
Not worrying about it.
What do you have in terms of, I know redundancy is a big thing for you, right? What do you have in terms of that type of, contingencies, right? In terms of any type of equipment failure, what do you have set up?
Well, this one is run pretty simply. There's really not, even if a component were to fail, the only area that I'm really susceptible at is the return pump, because it's a single return pump. I use a pretty good return pump that I'm running through there, and I keep a backup also in the sump that runs 15 minutes a day to just kind of stir the sump and also keep it kind of active. And it's all plumbed and ready to go. If it ever comes, I can just switch the two out immediately and get it back on. But the thing probably, which is the most for redundancy, is for power outages here. Now, power outages here is pretty rare, and they're usually pretty short-lived. But we do have windstorms, and something can happen. And so I keep a generator just over there on the other side of the garage. It can pull 30 amps. It can support 30 amps, so it can support this entire system. But when I wired this system, even for my cold water system, I broke it down into two circuits, two 20-amp circuits. One 20-amp circuit has all the critical things on it. The other 20-amp circuit has all the fluff on it. So and they're color-coded plugs. All I have to do is fire up the generator, run my extension cord over, unplug, plug in, the whole system comes live. And I've had to do that a few times this last winter. Usually only for a few hours, but if it had been for a day or two, I would have been fine. So everything went live.
What about if you're traveling?
I don't travel that much, but I have a couple friends around who are in the hobby who can certainly come over, and of course I have a webcam to make sure there's no wet fingers leaving the garage. But I can have them come over and do some feedings and whatnot. So I don't do a whole lot of traveling as much as I have in the past. So. Certainly, but I have some support that I can do if I had to.
That's critical.
Really is.
All right, a couple of things. One, I see a question here about your fish, but I wanted to ask you a question in terms of feeding, coral feeding. Anything that you do special for the corals, amino acids, any specific coral foods, feeds?
I really like the Captivate line. And I use actually quite a bit of their stuff. I like their coral foods with the different particle sizes, and I use pretty much all of those in a mixture. And I feed corals usually in the evening when everybody's coming out, maybe 8, 9 o'clock at night, kind of before I'm going to bed. I'll throw into the tank, and I'm just throwing in broadcast feeding them. And occasionally target feed them with turkey basters and whatnot. And for the dendros, I'm usually doing that as well as with solids, mysis, LRS, things like that, to target feed them, because they're like little anemones. They'll suck in a whole bunch. So I do feed the corals from that. I've never found much results with amino acids. And Jake and I used to talk about this. I said, well, what's the deal with the amino acids? Why are people using? He goes, well, I can tell a tank immediately if it's using amino acids. Well, how? He goes, well, the coral ends are always puffier and everything. I was like, who can see that? I can't see. I can't even read my phone. How am I going to see that? So I go, yeah, that's just not going to be my thing. So I haven't found a need to go to amino acids. And that's the other thing that I do add in there is minor and trace elements. Now, obviously, those are huge rabbit holes these days, moonshiners and everything else. And I can't go down those rabbit holes. That's too much for me. But I really like, and Jake turned me on to it, Captivate's M&T. And I've been using that. And I just got back a ICP test. And everything came back on there detectable with the exception of iron, which I guess immediately goes poof in your tank anyway. But I had little traces of, vanadium and cobalt and fluorine and everything else. And went, okay, well, it seems to be working just by my putting in a few eyedroppers of the M&T stuff. So I go, I really don't need to go down those rabbit holes and try to fine tune all of those. I'm happy with the way it looks. I'm not so sure I'm getting any benefit, and I'm increasing a massive amount of testing and workload. I'm just going to stick to the M&T. It's affordable, it's concentrated, it's easy.
So you're talking about the Captivate Isolate MT, which has multiple trace elements in it. So you're not doing the individual trace element dosing. So that
absolutely.
Yep. And what foods are you using from Captivate? Do you know off the top of your head?
Fluids. That's the only fluid I'm putting in.
Coral food.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
foods.
yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's probably different grinds is what I'm guessing. It's probably the same stuff in different grinds. And I basically have them all and we'll put in difference at different times. I'm sure the gonopore, the Gonni's like a little finer particulate matter because, like Gonni Power and stuff is pretty fine, which actually I use that a little bit, Reefroids, a little bit of that. All these things which are jacking my phosphate through the roof, hence the lanthanum chloride.
Yes, yes. Hey, Andrew Sandler's in the house. What's happening there, Andrew? Good to have you tuning in, right, versus being opposed to speaking on the show. So, fish. There was a question from who was asking the question? John Wright. Can we talk about Steve's fish?
Well, a big part of the tank for me is not the corals. So that's a big difference between my tank and Jake's tanks. I have fish and usually big fish. I think they're a big part of the display, so they're really important to me. Jake mostly used fish for utilitarian purposes, especially the tangs and all. And he had some pretty fantastic ones, and especially his yellow tangs were amazing. But there's some fish that I have always been intrigued with. One, back to when I first stuck my head in the water when I was 10 years old, Morishitals. It's one of my favorite fish, but they're not can be user-friendly. It's very spotty. So this one here I've had almost from the beginning, so I'd say he's 2.5 years old now. Eats everything, flake, nori, scallop out of my hand, anything. And so he's been doing things, and I haven't seen him really touch any coral. Sometimes he'll pick at slime if something's sliming. But so far he's been pretty good, but I'm under no illusion that is going to stay forever. Someday, I figure my Emperor, my Regal, and my Morishitals, enjoy them while I can, because someday I may not be able
Copper
to.
band.
They're going to have
Copper band.
Copper band. Copper band was a pain in the butt. Especially my wife, she loves copper bands, and I love copper bands too. So hard to beat. It took me 7 months of feeding nothing but live blackworms before he finally got on to frozen. Nice. Finally, 7 months of live blackworms. So
wow.
I was like, oh. Yeah, but he finally started, okay, I'll eat this other stuff. Now he eats everything. He'll eat scallop out of my hand, everything.
Awesome.
He won't touch flake food. Everybody in here will eat flake food, with the exception of the copper band. So I feed flake food as well. So, and a little bit of pellets occasionally.
And
too.
I see,
especially if I'm traveling.
I see you've got a powder blue tang in there. I had a gorgeous powder blue that I had to give up because it turned into an asshole, which is their reputation.
Exactly. Well, this guy is actually the last fish to go in here is the powder blue. And I got him, I don't know, 6-7 months ago. And he was about the size of maybe one of my damsels. I got him because I never saw a powder blue that small at the store. And I went, okay, all my other tangs are huge. There's no way they're just going to slap him silly. So I said, I'm pretty safe putting him in, and he's gone in. He's gotten bigger, obviously, and but he's way behind the pecking order, behind the Achilles, who rules the roost, and then of course next in line is the purple tang. So I think obviously additional order.
Yeah, for sure. Jason Natal is asking, what about your Achilles? What foods do you feed him specifically?
He'll eat anything. He eats scallop out of my hand. He loves nori. They get nori every morning. He eats flake food, he eats pellets, he eats everything. And always has from the very beginning, from the time I got him. He's been in here for a couple years now, and does really well. So that's why I was kind of concerned with that report, and I started seeing him starting to flash a little bit. It's like, I don't want to lose you.
No.
So I was like, I'm putting the UV back on.
Unorthodox Reef, my Moorish randomly decided to shred SPS at like the 2-year mark, like a dog on a bone.
See, that can happen. I'm under no illusion that it's forever, but enjoy it while I can.
Jason Natal also says, Steve, your tank is amazing. Was my inspiration for going large once my family and I settled into our new home. Finally, I got a piece of the Oregon Tortiosa from Keith from my centerpiece acro. That is a centerpiece acro. I have one in every one of my tanks. Just
yeah. I do think Jake's Hoaxamai rivals it.
Really?
Yeah, it's right there, below there. It was just a little nubbin when I got it. Now it's pretty good size. But it has a similar coloration, obviously a different growth pattern. I think once the growth pattern sets in, I think it may surpass the Oregon Tour because they're
Wow.
very similar in coloration. But I much prefer the Hoaxamai growth pattern as opposed to the Oregon Tour.
That's a pretty significant statement, man. I mean, that's
yeah,
wow.
absolutely. I never thought so either. A lot of people get on the Immortal Tort. By the way, it truly is an Immortal Tort. 3 days after I got it, it fell into my blue carpet anemone.
And it survived.
And I pulled it out and
wow.
it survived. It truly is immortal. I couldn't
Jeez.
believe it.
Those carpets, man, are like, forget about it.
Oh,
they
yeah,
hurt,
exactly.
They hurt like human beings. I mean, you know, like you'll get stung bad.
I pulled it out and I immediately texted Kate, truly is immortal. I just pulled it out of my blue carpet.
Yikes. Andrew Sandler, aminos are going out of style. Huh. Interesting. What was the other thing I wanted to ask you? I don't know, dude. Did we miss anything? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, Steve.
I guess not. I think pretty much we covered everything that you want to cover, but there's lots of other things you can always go into, but it's kind of the gist of it going on. It is unique, I think, this tank, and kind of, I'm a little bit old school in what I try to achieve. I'm much more visual. These days, there's so many more different ways to participate in this hobby than there was in our day. How many times now you see tanks that are literally just frag tanks? Yeah. And grow out tanks, which is fine. It's a different way of participating in the hobby. You have those that are coral centric, fish centric, others that are, you know, sail centric. And these days it seems like there's another subset of, you know, equipment centric. So like, I have this equipment, this equipment. I don't know how many times you look at a 50-page online build thread, and 50 pages later, and there's still not water in the tank. so it's all about the lights and equipment. And I don't know when it became popular to, you know, look at the light or have your lights visible. I don't understand that. There's no way I can do that. I just have a shroud around mine. And the other thing that I find fascinating, everybody uses one light. I use Radions. I use Mitras. I use XYZ, you know, whatever it is. It's like, well, I don't. I use Orphex, I use Radions, and I use Kessels because they all do things differently and they all provide a different look. So I use all three for where I want them to be. My Radions are over my anemones. My Kessels are providing a little shimmer. My Orphex are providing that T5 look on the front. So against some of my bluer coral. So I use a multiple of lights to create the look that I'm trying to achieve from what we had back in the day. Everybody today, it looks the same. Red Sea, Red Sea, Red Sea, you know, Radion, Radion, Radion. It's just like, I mean, I never really liked looking at them. It's another, to me, eyesore, but to each his own. But that's something, it's like, why don't people use different lights? They all do different things differently, so.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. Right, and you know, and that's what we did years ago, right? In terms of running, you know, halides / T5 combos. Some people are running LEDs and halides and T5s, and
multiple bulb colorations.
Yep, mixing it up a little bit. Yep. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Question about Miracle Mud. Who's asking that question? John Wright. Steve, have you used Miracle Mud? Because some of my corals seem to love it. Is that anything you've tried in the past?
I have no doubt that may be the case, but my OCD will not allow anything with the word mud in it. Just like I can't do a refugium. They're just so messy. And like the way I do water changes, people say, oh, how you keep your sump so clean? Well, it's the way I do water changes. If I turn off my return pump, my sump will fill up with 100 gallons of water nearly exactly. I empty out the sump. Tank still doesn't even know water change is happening. It's just circulating around, doing its thing. I mix 100 gallons at a time. I completely empty out the sump, wipe it all down, fill it back up, turn the pump back on.
You wipe the sump down.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Usually every other water change.
Wow.
So it looks brand new. It basically looks like the video because I basically did one about a week before that video and I shot that video.
Wow.
On there. So that's the way it looks. So I cleaned it all out. So there's never any detritus or anything like that there because I cleaned it all out.
You can never visit me, man, because my sumps look freaking dirty and the wire management sucks. I mean, it's not pretty back there, but you know.
To each his own. We all have our thing, and that mine is kind of cleanliness. So
no, for sure. Polo Reef Landers. Yeah, I will be testing mud in the lab shortly. We're going to cause HLLE and try to cure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, some people love that stuff, the mud. All right.
Sure.
So, Steve, man, this has been awesome, dude. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the live stream. It really has been a continuation of our conversation in the Reef Builders studio. So it's been a lot of fun for me. I've learned a lot from you, and I'm sure everybody out there has as well. And again, are being inspired by your creativity and your talent in terms of keeping reef tanks. So keep it up, man. Love to have you back on again down the line.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So, folks, that's going to do it for this live stream. I really want to thank Steve for being on the live stream. I also want to thank both Bulk Reef Supply and Ecotech Marine for sponsoring it. And I also want to thank all of you for tuning in and participating via the chat. Thank you so much. Also, big thank you to Paul, who is the moderator, as well as the president of the Boston Reefer Society. Please join and support your local reefing clubs. They are so important to the hobby. A reminder that all of these episodes of Rappin with ReefBum are available as podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon. The next Rappin with ReefBum next week will be Thursday, August 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This will be another good one. Dr. Sanjay Yoshi and Mike Paletto will be on, so that should be another great show. I'm moving the show in September to Tuesday nights, so just a heads up that we're switching from Thursday nights to Tuesday nights starting, I think it's in September. That'll be a switch. If you want to check out the full upcoming schedule of guests, visit reefbum.com under the YouTube section. Until next time, be safe and be well. Later.